You know those videos you'll occasionally find online of someone's attempt at capturing a spooky sound they heard? The ones where the video is nearly pitch black, and you need to crank up the volume to maximum to be able to even faintly hear whatever noise the person who posted it is talking about. I always hated those videos with a passion. They always felt like a bundle of anticipation that never got any sort of decent payoff. More often than not, I tended to write them off as nothing more than a poor attempt at a viral video, rather than actual evidence of anything paranormal. I most certainly never took the apparent distress of the person behind the camera seriously either, for that matter. Now that I've experienced something similar, though, I found that I had a tad bit more empathy. It really isn't the kind of thing you can truly understand until you find yourself trembling in their shoes. It was about a week ago now. I was wandering the trails in the woods out back of my house in the early evening, and it was only just starting to get dark. I like to spend a fair bit of time out there. A nice walk up and down the trails always helps to clear my head. Plus, since I live near the foothills of some nearby mountains, the trails have some rather large slopes that make walking them pretty decent exercise. I was in the process of returning from such a walk, and was actually close to making it back home, when I heard something that made me immediately stop in my tracks. The harsh, pained cry of some sort of animal. I was immediately alert, my mind returning from wherever it had wandered off to during my casual stroll. I strained my ears to try and catch any further trace of the cry, but was met with only dead silence. It was strangely silent, as if all of nature was holding its breath in anticipation. I had almost convinced myself that maybe I had just imagined it, when it suddenly echoed out again, and then, about 20 to 30 seconds later, it repeated itself once more. Over and over again, the cries echoed throughout the forest, nearly identical to each other. As a person who hasn't exactly often found themselves around suffering animals, I had never quite heard a cry like that. So very full of anguish and pain. My heart ached with concern and empathy for the poor beast. It seemed to echo throughout the woods, but with each subsequent cry, I started to get a better sense of where it was coming from. It seemed close. I wondered for a moment what could be making the noise. The cry seemed ambiguous, almost like it could be anything. However, soon my blood ran cold as I thought of something. I remembered the stray cat that had been hanging around recently, the one which I had been feeding and had even considered adopting. As the thought occurred to me, the cry started to seem more and more distinctly feline. Any trace of hesitation quickly left me as I rushed down the slope, headed in the direction of the cry. I still couldn't quite get an exact bead on where it was coming from, but I knew it was somewhere off of the path. I carefully, yet hurriedly, made my way through the dense underbrush, taking care not to get tangled up in anything unpleasant. The cries continued on, only growing louder and more distinct as I drew closer. It occurred to me that something seemed sort of off about the cries. They seemed more and more identical to each other the closer I got. You could have almost convinced me that it had somehow been pre-recorded and was now stuck in a loop. It was then that the cry started to change. It kept the same rhythm of repetition, maybe growing a bit faster if anything, but it also started to grow deeper. As it did, it started to become throatier, strangely wet, and even a bit gargly. Thinking that perhaps this meant the blood was leaking into the poor thing's lungs, I quickened my pace. I was surprisingly close to the edge of the woods where my house was located, and was just able to make out my back porch light through the trees. All of a sudden, the cry didn't come again. I stopped in my tracks, fearing the worst. Without the sound guiding me, I had no further way of knowing where to go. I waited there, hoping to hear any kind of sound to guide my path. The forest had grown even darker during my search, and I deeply regretted not bringing a flashlight. I considered giving up on the search and perhaps returning in the morning when I could actually see. It was then that I finally heard something. However, it wasn't exactly what I was hoping for. It was a thick, throaty chortle, almost a cackle, and clearly not an animal. Following it was the distinct snapping of branches and rapid footfalls heading my way. Some remnant of primal instinct told me that whatever was coming my way, it certainly wasn't something I wanted to stick around and meet. I turned and sprinted towards my house, which was thankfully in the opposite direction. It wasn't actually all that far away, but adrenaline and fear made the distance seem too great and my pace far too slow. I knew whatever was chasing me was drawing closer, and that it seemed I had very little chance of outpacing it. It let out a screech that was half scream and half roar, and I felt little flecks of whatever fluid filled its throat hit the back of my neck. Its throaty, wet screech confirmed my suspicions that I had been fooled, but it was hardly time to worry about that. Something snatched at the back of my shirt, hooking through the fabric and digging into my back. I let out a cry of pain of my own as I was pulled back and lifted off my feet and into the air. I flailed about wildly, too consumed with fear to pay any mind to the pain. I must have gotten lucky and caught something sensitive with my elbow or heel, as it let me loose with a pain grunt. I fell to the ground, surprised to find that it was suddenly a well-maintained lawn. I had made it to my yard. Scrambling quickly across the grass, I was just able to make it to my back door in time, ripping it open, slamming it shut behind me, and locking it all in one shaky but thankfully precise motion. I half expected the whatever it was to try and bust down the door to come in after me. With the strength it showed lifting me, a 180-pound man with one arm, I was more or less certain that it could. Yet, for whatever reason, it didn't come. I sat there, just inside my back door, for quite a while, hyperventilating. My adrenaline rush could only last so long, though, and I soon began to calm down. Relief didn't come with this new sense of calm, as the pain from the wound on my back began to set in as my fear receded. Feeling at the area blindly, my hand came away slick with blood. Eventually, I struggled to my feet, knowing that I had to do something about my back. I happened to glance out a window as I made my way to the bathroom to get cleaned up. When I did, I thought I saw something. It was a strange, gangly thing. It seemed vaguely human-shaped, but its proportions were all messed up. It seemed emaciated, and its arms were weirdly thin and far too long for its body, stretching all the way down past its knees. Its legs were like wiry stilts, supporting a shriveled torso and head. I think it was looking at me. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I tried to get a closer look at it. However, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished once more, almost as if it had never been there to begin with. Even looking back on it now, I'm still not convinced that it was really there. The wound on my back didn't seem so serious at first. It was large and oddly shaped, as if a person with claws and a hand twice the size of a normal human's had slashed me across my right shoulder. However, in spite of how vicious it appeared, the cuts were actually very shallow and didn't seem to require stitches. I don't exactly have health insurance, so I was more or less okay with any excuse to not have to deal with hospital bills. That night, I simply disinfected the wound and bandaged it up as best I could with what I had on hand. That was a serious mistake on my part. In the days since, I've been rather ill. I had thought that it was unrelated to my experience that night, and figured it would pass. However, now I'm not so sure. I have a fever that won't seem to fade, and I can't sleep without suffering from strange nightmares of running through a dark forest. The scratches on my back have healed without even leaving a scar. Yet they still burn with pain as if the claws were still in my flesh. I've lost a lot of weight, an alarming amount really, yet I can never seem to work up any sort of appetite. At this point, I hardly care about my lack of insurance. After I finish typing this, I'm headed to the hospital. Hefty bill or not, this isn't something I can deal with on my own. It's funny. Right now, all I can think of is that I wish I had thought to record any of what had happened on my phone, or something. Even if it ended up being a far too dark video with audio that was only vaguely audible, it would have been nice to have something to use to prove to the doctors and myself that I'm not crazy. I just hope that it isn't too late for them to help me. Thank you, Spooks and Spookettes, for joining me for this reading. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, I would really appreciate a like on this video. If you think you have a story for me to read, I will leave links below where you can send it. Also, look forward to reading any comments left down below. If you'd like to join me for more, there's always a subscribe and notification buttons that would really make my day. If you're not ready to subscribe just yet, I hope you will check out my other videos. Thanks again, and wishing you sweet nightmares.